Ah, okay. So I'm going to start things up, even though I realize some people are going to continue to jump on as we only gave them 4 minutes of headway. But first, I want to thank those who are tuning in with us, and also to let people know that later on, we're going to have opportunities for questions, but you should feel free to, chat with the group, chat with me if you have questions that you want me to ask on your behalf. There are no questions that are bad questions. We're all just trying to make sense of the current realities, and we're all trying to get clarity around things so that we can respond as each moment requires, and also feel confident in the way that we address the situation at hand. So tonight, I want to introduce our three panelists, all high school seniors. I'm going to start with Noah because she's literally in my home. Noah Roan is a high school senior at Beth Tefillah. She is joined with Elon Vogelstein, also a high school senior at Beth Tefillah, and also with Zach Minkin, who is a high school senior at Gilman. So thank you all for being here tonight. And the reason that the three of you came to mind is that, one, you all have strong relationships with Israel. You all recently participated this past summer in the Diller program. You follow the news, you know what's going on in Israel, you are well educated, and you are also people who are confident in who you are and have some expertise, I would say, as teenagers in how we navigate these days. And also, hopefully, you will be able to guide other teenagers in how they can do so as well. And when it's worth it, right? When is it worth it to weigh in, to use your voice, to advocate? And when is it worth it to just let things pass you by, especially on social media? So I want to actually just start by asking you all an easy question, and then we'll sort of dive into the issues. But the easy question that I want to ask you is, how have these past, I guess it's been, 5 weeks been for you since October 7th? How have these past weeks been for you just personally? And what has been the hardest part of this past stretch since October 7th for you? And maybe there's more than one, but just as a way to introduce yourself and your thoughts.
I could go first. So on October 7th, I was taking I was about to take an SAT, and I woke up in the morning, all focused on that, and then I opened my phone, and on Twitter I saw the terrible images and the terrible news, and guess I kind of felt like I needed to, stay focused on taking the SAT and not really focus on something else. So over the last couple of weeks, I've tried to both understand that I have personal connections to people that are through Diller, to people that are affected by this war, and then also that there is a whole sphere of separation between me and the conflict, obviously physically, but then emotionally, how should I feel in response, and trying to balance out the physical and emotional separation as a student and as an American too.
Beautiful. Thanks, Zach. Elon and Noah?
So Minkin touched on this, but I think right now there are a few different wars going on. So, first and foremost, there's the physical war in Israel. But then also there's an information war, and tied to that, there's kind of like a mental war, because so much of what we hear, we need to decipher whether it's truth or if it's fiction. And even if we know it, it can be very hard to see people that we know who can be naive or misinformed or just outright anti-Semitic. So it can be very challenging to look at the news, to look on social media, and to be overwhelmed with so many different people saying so many different things when many of them are just flat out wrong.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. To echo Elon, it's been really challenging seeing on social media and even people that I have personal relationships with spread, harmful information that, I don't think is accurately portraying the situation. And I think that's a challenge that we're seeing a lot for specifically teenagers on college campuses, even in high schools. I mean, Ilan and I are lucky enough to go to a Jewish high school where that's not a problem that we encounter. Maybe Zach can speak to his experiences not going to a Jewish high school and how that's been for him. But I think that I want to acknowledge that everything that we're going to say just comes from like our own personal research. We do not know even close to everything that's been happening and in the history of what's happening. But I do think that it's important to know the facts and to get them from reliable sources, and then also be smart about who you're interacting with and when you choose to share that information, because sometimes the battles aren't worth it.
So Noah, I want to actually pick up there and ask you, all three of you, this question. What do you think as teenagers are your best news sources? And then what do you think are actually the sort of danger zones where teenagers are getting information, but it's actually not accurate or reliable information?
I think I read, like, in the morning, I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and kind of hard news, like mainstream sort of, newspapers. I look at Twitter. Usually Twitter's pretty good. And then the danger zone is kind of Instagram, in my opinion. I see a lot of like Instagram stories posted around with like different, brightly colored infographics that just like, might look, physically like pretty good, but then when you actually read what they're saying, it's like just ridiculous, kind of what Noah and Elon were already saying, just complete misinformation that's just packaged in a sort of satisfying blurb for somebody to just throw up on their story and pass on to the next person.
And Zach, could you give me an example of that? Like, what's something that you've seen recently that looked like it was, legitimate, and then when you read a little bit closer, you came to learn that actually it was misleading and not factual?
I mean, I think some people that I knew from not that closely, but they posted on social media some stories and some infographics from like this one like Palestinian liberation youth movement where it was actually really alarming. It showed a photo or a portrait of like the skydiver, like the paratrooper thing, and that has now become like, or at least after the attack, became the sort of rallying cry for liberation, which obviously is a terrorist going into a Israeli village or uh, going to kill Israeli people. So that was like the immediate thing where I just saw like people were actually repurposing this image to, say this is some sort of call for liberation when all it was is just terror in its simplest form. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thanks, Zach. That's a good example. Where else for Elon and Noah, where are you getting your information, and would you warn people to just be wary of what they're seeing and understanding and reading?
Yeah. So particularly like after the summer, I went on a like 5-week trip to Israel with a fellowship called the Bronfman Fellowship, where we really delved into Israeli history. So after that, I became more interested in really learning the history in depth of Israel. I started listening to this podcast from the Unpacked organization. It's called Unpacking Israeli History. And I think it does a really good job of presenting facts from both sides. And they say that they have a clear Zionist intention or bias. But I do think that even with that, they present both sides fairly well. So I've been listening to that where they talk about issues in Israeli history. And then even before the war, I've always, kind of looked around at various different news sources. I'll look at Fox News, I'll look at Al Jazeera, I'll look at pretty much any news source on the same stories as well, just to see the difference in how they're covering it. And, you know, maybe some are including information that the other one isn't, or vice versa. But just making sure that you have a full picture of what's happening. And then I'd say, you know, I wouldn't say steer clear of Instagram or social media, because I do think that's not the reality. I think that, you know, the reality is that teens will probably see breaking news happening on Instagram faster than they will on the news. So I'd say, fine, look on social media. Just when you see something, when you see a headline, make sure to verify it and go to Safari and do a quick type in to make sure that what's being portrayed is actually accurate. And make sure that you're looking at multiple news sources, so you're getting a full picture of what's happening.
No, that sounds like it's pretty labor intensive, that it takes a lot of time to actually sort of fact check things. Can you do that quickly or?
Totally. I mean, it takes about as long as it does to send a text. And, you know, this is one of the things that I think is very important to give some of your time into. And, you know, as a Jew in today's climate, invest in your Jewish education and learning about the political climate of today and of Israeli history, so that you're able to have these conversations and to make informed decisions based on Israel.
Thanks, Noah. What about you, Elon? What do you suggest people follow, read, and where do you think people need to be wary, teenagers anyway?
Well, to be general, I think two things I pay particular attention to are, number one, what's the source? You know, I think once you determine whether or not the source is credible, then you don't have to do nearly as much fact checking with what they say, because you know you've accepted what they're saying is true for the most part. And the second thing, you know, is just like reading beyond the headline, because they have these big headlines, and it can be much easier just to stop there. And when in reality, you know, if you keep going, you'll see that it's much more nuanced. And especially on social media, people love to post, you know, snapshots, just the headline. And if they were to actually read more into it, then they would realize that what they're posting is contrarian to what they're, you know, saying is in that article. And then one last thing that I came across that I thought was very cool. You mentioned, you know, it can be, how can you fact check? It could be very labor intensive. Well, there's actually this AI that specifically was created for what's going on in Israel. And it's like a fact checking AI for this war. And you can, you know, insert like a statement, and it will tell you not only whether or not it's true, but it will tell you how you can respond to someone if they're saying that.
That's so interesting, Elon. At some point of our conversation, would you put that information into the chat so
Yeah.
that people can figure out how they can do that? Or is it just as
Yeah.
easy as, yeah,
Yeah, I'll look for the link and I'll put it in there.
that sounds great. All right, so let's talk about sort of the accusations, the false facts, and let's talk about how you respond. And let's actually first start with how are you guys responding to what I'm probably going to imagine is a lot of attacks that are happening on social media? Would you say that that's where teenagers are sort of feeling the most under attack? I will sort of put out there, and hopefully those words resonate.
I'd say that, you know, for me, being exposed to a more diverse community on social media, I think so, yes, is where I'm getting the most pushback. But I'd also say that it's my impression from friends that I've spoken to on, you know, secular schools and on college campuses, that that's where they're finding the most debate and pushback from. Maybe Zach can speak to that more.
Yeah, I'd say personally, I just avoid trying to respond to people on social media. I mean, I just think it's kind of futile. People are gonna believe what they're gonna believe, and the sad truth is that if I went up and messaged somebody who posted some terrible infographic, they'd be like, well, I still believe what I believe. Maybe that would even cement their beliefs further, whatever. But at school, as Noah mentioned, I go to Gilman. Um, I've actually not really seen too much in terms of a lot of discourse about the conflict. I think at my school, and I think at most high schools, I would say that politically, campuses don't really seem to be that outspoken. And I think mainly that's just because kids don't want to be ostracized. Like somebody might, genuinely support Palestinian liberation, but they don't want their friends to be like, well, I don't want you, or the other way around. So people just avoid discussing conflict. And that doesn't just relate to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, that relates to other social upheaval and social questions. So fortunately, I've not really had to experience any conflict, like difficult, really tough conversations, but at the same time, school is kind of the place where you should be talking about this stuff. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Yes, you avoid the conflict, but you're also kind of just avoiding the conversation as well, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a tough question.
So the three of you all sort of spoke about sort of the maybe even personal rules of engagement. So this idea that there are some times that it's worth it to sort of go there in terms of the discourse, and then there are other times where it actually might not be, right? Zach, you said that your response will probably not change someone's mind. What are your sort of tried and true rules for engagement around the war that's happening between Israel and Hamas?
I would say, like, if you know me, like, I am the biggest advocate for dialogue that you'll meet. Really, I think it's very important to see both perspectives. And I think that social media is not the place to do that. I think that there's a lack of education coming from a lot of the people who are, mindlessly posting a lot of different things. I think that, Zach touched on this, but I don't think that there's a willingness to learn on social media. I think that there have to be settings, whether that be on campuses or someone else, where people are committed to dialogue. But I think that, for me, I steer clear of getting into online fights with other people. I just don't think it's worth your time, because you're not going to change their opinion, they're not going to change yours. It's unproductive, really.
Thanks, Noah. I'm wondering, Elon and Zach, do you both agree with that, or are you taking a different approach?
Well, to determine whether or not I want to engage with someone, I think it comes down to two things. So the first thing would be, do I know this person? Because if I know them, and I have like some kind of relationship with them, then it pains me even more to see that they are posting things that are so false. So I think if I know them, then I have some kind of responsibility to try to talk to them, because this leads to the second thing: are they misinformed, or are they anti-Semitic, or And I think the distinction there is that if they're misinformed, then maybe I can change their mind. Maybe they just don't know enough. And it's not that they have any prejudice. It's just, they haven't learned about this conflict as in the ways that we have. But if someone is, they seem anti-Semitic, then I don't think it's really worth my time, because I'm not going to make any impact on their views.
Yeah, I say that I do know at lunch I talked with some of my friends about it, and some of my Jewish friends and I have disagreements. So in that way, we kind of have common ground to build off of. So we just talk about our own experiences. But yeah, social media just kind of useless. If you're not having like a personal connection, like face to face, I don't really see how you could ever really change anything. And like Elon said, if somebody's obviously just stuck in their ways, there's no point in spending. I mean, it's kind of sad, but like there's no point in really spending energy trying to fix somebody who just hates Jewish people or hates the state of Israel. There's nothing that you can really do about it. So maybe just focus more on people who seem genuinely either uninformed on the matter that want to learn more, or somebody who, seems informed, and you could have a discussion about it from a place of information and facts, not just like hyperbole and stuff they've seen on social media.
Yeah. So let me ask you this question. You know, do you feel like you've been surprised since October 7th in the way? I mean, yes, of course, by the attack. I think no one could have ever seen that coming. But have there been other things that have surprised you? I know the adult world is sort of saying like anti-Semitism is feels like that was a real surprise. As teenagers, how are you navigating this, and how are you making sense of it, and what are the emotions sort of connected to this moment in time for you guys?
Zach, you want to start us off?
Oh, sure. I could just say that as a teenager, I don't really have like as much experience to really contextualize like the true. I think as teenagers in general, this is kind of more of it feels just like a normal, not normal, but it just seems like right now we're living in tumultuous times, and this is just another part of this timeline, like COVID, 2020 election, George Floyd. It just seems like this is just at this point kind of normal. And so I think for a lot of people, we become kind of numb to this and these sort of huge conflicts. And it's gonna take maybe a couple of months before we see the full effects of this on the world stage. And I just think it's just kind of hard to really contextualize it at this point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Zach.
I have not been surprised by the increase in anti-Semitism. If we look at just trends over time, we see that anti-Semitism has continued to rise, and the United Nations, they've always held Israel to a double standard. So I have not been surprised by the negative things that are occurring. But on the flip side, what I've appreciated is just the outpouring of support from the Jewish community. If we just think about the march tomorrow, they're expecting 500,000 people, which is incredible to me. And in Israel, there's like all these stories of 6,000 people need to find homes because they have to relocate, and within 45 minutes, every single person has found a place to stay. So everyone's really united. So I haven't been surprised by the anti-Semitism, but I have really just enjoyed seeing all the support.
Yeah, just to echo Elon, I think that's really inspiring is the unity that you see coming out of this. I will also say that in the events after October 7th, not much of it has been surprising to me. I think there's a lack of nuance among a lot of our generation. The idea that you have to be at one extreme or the other, or that, if you agree with this political party on one thing, you got to stick with them for every issue. Or, if you agree with Palestine on one thing, or if you agree with Israel, then you have to support that side during this war. And I don't think that's the case. I will say that, like Elon said, that the unity in this has been tremendous, and again, not surprising, because in history you see this since World War II with the Jewish community coming together during times when Israel needs them most. And I think, again, I haven't been alive during all those other historic moments in Israel, but to me, this feels like the most unity that we've seen from the Jewish community regarding Israel in its history. So.
And just sorry, two things I want to add on. First of all, Israel, the day before these attacks, Israel was extremely divided politically, but after, within hours, everyone was very united. And the second thing is, I remember on the day that all this happened, people were saying from the start, give it a week, give it 2 weeks, and everyone's condemning what's going on now, but very soon the tide's gonna turn against Israel, and they're absolutely right.
So let's talk about how we stand by and for and with Israel, even when the tide has turned, right? Let's talk about, first, that takes a ton of courage. It takes confidence. It takes some chutzpah nowadays. But let's talk about what are the ways that you as teens sort of advocate for Israel? We've spoken about some of the ways that it's just not worth it, but what are the ways that are worthwhile?
Personally, I write for the Gilman News, so I wrote a piece about the conflict, and I thought, maybe a few people read it, and some people liked it, and some people might not have, but then they came up to me and talked to me about it. So in that way, the goal was to kind of foster conversation, maybe, and if I put my opinion out there, maybe somebody else will put their opinion out there too. But then I also think that just telling people about your experiences in the country, like we've all been fortunate to travel there this summer, and I tell people all the time that it's a wonderful place, and there is a high level of coexistence that you won't see in other places and you're there, and that really just people just want to live and be happy. And like, sure, there might be extremists on both sides, right-wing Israelis or Hamas, but it seems like the general consensus amongst everyday people is that they're okay with just surviving. And I think that people outside the conflict like to find this to be an extremist kind of conflict, like Noah and Elon mentioned. But if you kind of just tell people that Israelis and Palestinians actually just want peace, then maybe somebody will be like, oh, yeah, maybe I just want that too.
I think there's a sense of hopelessness from over here, being a teenager in America, not knowing, what you can do to support the war. And I've been feeling that too. What I've been doing is small things to help, whether that's donating, my tutoring money to different organizations, or checking in on your Israeli friends and relatives and those in Israel, making sure that they're okay. I'd say learning the facts, being an educated person about what's happening is really important. And then I'd say, showing up for your community and doing small acts of service, and that remind people the importance of unity right now, and kindness, I think, is really important. And also taking care of yourself, making sure that an attack on Israel doesn't end Jewish life for all of us, and that Jewish strength still persists at the end of the day.
Elon.
Yeah. So one thing I heard last week that I found shocking, and maybe it's changed since then, but I heard that the pro Hamas, pro ceasefire, pro Palestine supporters were reaching out to Congress at a ratio of 6-1 compared to the Jewish community. So I think one thing that we can all do is, there are a lot of links that allow you to send a pre-written email. It takes you, less than a minute. And just because we're teenagers doesn't mean that, our emails are any less effective. So I think by, applying some pressure to, politicians can be a very effective way to, maintain the U.S. support.
Thanks, Elon. Absolutely. Elon, will you put in the chat for people that are on ways that they can be in, whether it's emails or different links that they can use if they want to start to use their political muscle, right? To start to write to congressmen, write to senators, write to our politicians that are involved in decision making, because right now we certainly do need, America's support for a whole bunch of different reasons, and partnership, I would say. I think America also needs Israel right now. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about the facts and the misinformation that's circulating. Why don't we take a turn and each of you say sort of one of the things that's most misunderstood about the war or about Israel right now, whether that's about Hamas or Gaza, or maybe it's is Jews' right to the Jewish homeland. What is one thing that's like just driving you crazy? And if you could teach everybody, this is what you would try to teach them.
That's a good question. We actually prepared a slideshow of a few different things that are driving us crazy that we've been seeing on social media specifically, and why, they're not true. So maybe we can share that. That'd be all right. All right, I'll share my screen. Can you all see that?
Yep.
All right. Let me.
I'd also say that Jewish Unpacked is really good with these sorts of videos on YouTube. They have a lot of really in-depth videos, which I have been watching. So, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other websites that do similar things, but it's still loading for me.
Yeah, the first one that you'll hear a lot, that's written on the screen for Zach, if you can't see it, is Israel is full of white colonial settlers. And there are really several inaccuracies with that. Zach, you able to see it, or you want
Yeah,
me
I can just pull it up on my computer and just speak about it.
Great.
So colonialism is defined as the practice of a foreign state or group of people exercising control over another area or country. But in Israel, what we've seen is not colonialism, it's instead a return of Jewish people to their ancestral homeland. So the term colonialism is an inaccurate way of describing what is happening, because Jewish people are simply returning to their homeland. They're not attempting to exercise or impart influence of a foreign nation when they are moving back to their own nation. And an example of actual colonization that we have seen in Israel in its history was the Roman colonization of Israel, and kicking out Jewish Jewish Israelis around 70 CE and continuing on until the Ottomans had control and named it Palestine. But then obviously after the fall of the Ottomans, went with the Balfour Declaration and the British giving the Jewish people the right to return to Israel. That was simply not colonization, because Jewish people were not representing the interest of Britain. They were representing their own interests in returning to their own homeland. And also the idea that Israel is just a bunch of white Europeans is also false, because Israelis, over 60% of the Jewish population in Israel actually comes from the Middle East or African countries to begin with. So it's not majority European to begin with. And then there was one piece of pushback, which is legitimate, is discussing the settlements in the West Bank. Some settlements are legitimate because they were gained after the 6-Day War. But there have been increased settlements which have thrown into question the legitimacy of settlements in the West Bank as a whole. However, the U.S. still diplomatically stands by it, although a lot of other nations have gone against it. So perhaps in some way, settlements do represent a sort of colonization or unfair settlement at this point.
And Zach, the distinction to be made, though, is that what you're discussing is really in the West Bank.
Yes,
and
not in Israel as a whole.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing. The war is really happening in Gaza,
Yes,
right? That people are, and Hamas is primarily in Gaza, but it's an interesting thing because the West Bank is another sort of entity with different leadership, right? And, that's also in some ways sort of coloring the bigger issue. Although I think people are conflating, I think, these two areas for sure.
That's a good point. Very good point.
What do you guys think? And that was a beautiful sort of summary of what's going on in response to the accusation of colonization. What do you think is being what do you think are the other realms that that Jews and Israel and Israelis are being challenged in right now? You said the colonization issue. What are the other things that we're sort of feeling under attack for?
You'll hear a lot of the times about Israel being an apartheid state. And that's just factually inaccurate. Israel is not a perfect country. I don't agree with everything that it's done historically. And you also have to be mindful of the labels that you're putting onto Israel that are just factually inaccurate. We have, hold on, if I'll pull it up, the definition of apartheid according to the UN is, there we go. The Rome Statute defines it as inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over another racial group, and committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. So there are a few inaccuracies with that. First of all, about 20% of the Israeli population who have citizenship rights are Arabs. So there are Arab citizens in Israel with full rights, the same rights that Jewish Israelis have. Now it gets complicated. There are other Palestinian Arabs in Israel that are either in the West Bank or Gaza, where their citizenship rights get a little bit fuzzy because of past conflicts. But to start, there are about 20% of Israel's population that has full rights. So that automatically dispels the fact that there is one racial group supremacy over another. And you can see that these citizens in Israel have full rights. They're in political parties in the Knesset. They serve as, high-ranking judges, ambassadors, and other professions. Next is the part of it's committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. So this goes back a little bit to Israeli history, but the West Bank and Gaza, where it gets a little bit fuzzy about Palestinian citizenship rights. In 1948, that was part of the land that Israel wasn't in control over. In 1967, after Arab nations attacked Israel, Israel gained the West Bank, the Sinai Peninsula, and Gaza. And then that started the occupation of those lands. Now, that occupation was never supposed to be permanent. It still is not permanent. It's a temporary, I guess you could say, solution, but I think we all know it's really not a solution, but it was put in place temporarily until Israel could figure out what to do with it, whether to give it to make it into a two-state solution, or figure something else out, grant full citizenship rights to Palestinians, but it is not with the intention of maintaining that status. So again, the permanent oppression of one racial group over another, it's not permanent. It was temporary, and it was created out of the necessity for safety and security reasons. So that's a few reasons why the label of apartheid is just fully inaccurate when describing Israel.
Thanks, Noah. Ilan, what about you? What do you think is something, a misinformation that's driving you a little crazy lately?
I think the misconception that, you can't support the Palestinian people yet condemn their leadership, because, I think many Jews, myself included, I sympathize, with, many civilians in, that are Palestinians. But at the same time, I think their leadership, Hamas, which rules Gaza, must be eliminated. So when people, say, oh, Israel is denying aid and, is really harming the Palestinians, and Israel, is very much against the Palestinians, I think that's just blatantly incorrect. I think Israel obviously is extremely opposed to Hamas and the leadership, and many of the citizens, are not at fault, and it's a really difficult place that they're in. But I think it's more because of Hamas than it is because of Israel.
And if I can just add on the flip side of that, you don't have to agree that with all of Israel's policies, or you don't have to agree with the current status of Palestinians in Israel to recognize that this war between Israel and Hamas is not as complicated as those issues. And to support Israel during this war, and be able to separate the history of the conflict with the terrorism that happened on October 7th and the events since then.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. So I want to ask you in closing, I just want to ask you a fun question. First, what's your favorite thing about Israel?
The food.
I personally love the food.
Good answer.
Thanks, Zach.
I'll say just a quick story. I remember I think it was the first time I went to Israel, but I think we had just landed. We went to Jerusalem from Ben Gurion, and for some reason we were out and I really had to pee. And there was no public bathroom nearby. So my mom and I were scrambling around trying to find a place to pee. And there was like a man outside of his apartment, and my mom was like, "Hey, is it okay if, like my daughter can go pee in your house?" And he was like, "Of course, come on in," offered us like water, and I of course said, "No, thank you, I'm okay." And my mom goes, "No, no, it's not just a formality here." And I said, "Okay, I'll have water, sure." And I think that was just my first exposure to uh, the genuine kindness and sense of community in Israel. I'll admit that, I think there is a cultural barrier where Israelis can sometimes come off as more harsh isn't the right word, but a little bit more aggressive than Americans. But when they give you when they extend an offer, and when they say something, they really mean it. And I really appreciate that genuine kindness that you see throughout Israel, and the sense of family throughout Israel.
Well, I was going to say the food before Minkin stole my idea, but what I think probably is really my favorite thing is that, you know, I fit in, and, in other places I have to explain, why can't I use technology on a Saturday? Why can't I eat certain foods? But in Israel, it's understood, and I can be myself. I don't have to, help other people understand why I'm doing to them, it seems extremely weird things.
Yeah, I'd also like to briefly repeat Noah's point that my host family with Diller, Itai and his family were like the most welcoming people. They literally gave me their primary bedroom to stay in for the week, and the parents slept on the couches in the living room. So that was just everything they did was just so welcoming and made me feel at home. So I definitely agree with Noah's point.
Mm. It's hard to imagine how this moment in time will impact your Jewish identity, your connection to Israel in the long term. But I have actually noticed, and I'm wondering if you all can respond to this. I have noticed a lot of teenagers have started to wear Magin David, like Jewish stars and, high necklaces, and sort of wearing their Jewish identity with, I would say, some like pride, really, even and maybe even especially right now when that feels, like it's being challenged. Have you all noticed that? And what do you think it's about?
That reminds me of the Michelle Obama quote, "When they go low, we go high." And I think that, that's really important in this time, that when there's so much violence and threats towards the Jewish people and community, that you show your Jewish pride, and your unabashed Jewish pride. So that's why I think it's so important to go to, the march in DC tomorrow, to start going to shul if you haven't for the past however many years. Really get in touch with your Judaism, and show that what's happening is only making the Jewish community stronger, really. So I think now more than ever, it's really important to defend your people and their country and your country, and show that unabashed pride.
Yeah, I agree. I don't. Abby, my sister, I think is looking to buy a new necklace right now. Uh, so, um, I think on college campuses, especially, like people are feeling like, you're gonna be so anti-Semitic. I might as well be proud and loud and proud about my Judaism, and I think that it's kind of like you can't silence us kind of thing. Like you can think that you scare us, but actually you don't scare us kind of thing. And I think that's very powerful and something that I'll look to do when I'm in college as well, is to, kind of what Elon said about messaging politicians and reaching out is the same thing. You have to be as much of a fierce advocate as they are a detractor kind of thing. So I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now.
And if I could just
Yeah,
add
no,
one thing. Yeah, sorry,
go
Elaine.
ahead.
If I could just add one thing, I think it's really important to remember that, after American Jews and Jews around the world let the atrocities of World War II happen and the Holocaust happen, I think it's important to make sure that something like that never happens again to the Jewish people. So now's the time to use your voice and advocate for Jews and make sure that Jews don't have to suffer like that, and that we won't stand by again.
Elon, you're up.
Yeah, I think Noah and Zach summed it up well. But it's just what's incredible about the Jewish people, that when they try to hurt us, we just emerge even stronger. And you just like look at the different nations that have tried to destroy us, and where are they now? Mark Twain, people are probably familiar with his quote about the Jews, but if you aren't, I think it really says it all.
Do you mind enlightening us as to what that quote is?
Oh, well, it's a pretty long quote, so I can look it up. I don't know it off the
Okay,
top of my head.
never mind then. I'll
But
look it
it's
up. Yeah.
it's like, what is the secret of the Jews' immortality?
I've seen that quote. Yeah.
That's like the general idea.
Elon,
I
put
can
it in the
read
chat if you don't mind. I feel like that's a beautiful
I can
quote.
read you his quote. It's, well, it's kind of long, but it's like, it's like, if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1/4 of 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. And he keeps going on. And he says, he is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is as extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. And then later, when he talks about, different groups that have tried to, harm and eradicate the Jewish people, he says, the Jew saw them all, survived them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert but aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jews, all other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality?
I just put it in
Thank
the
you,
chat
Elon.
as well. Yeah.
I love your partnership. Okay, we're done in 1 minute. I want you to all to take 30 seconds. If you could guide teenagers to listen or read one thing right now, what would it be?
Israel by Noah Tishby.
Good.
I would say Israel, Concise History of a Nation Reborn by Daniel Gordis.
Beautiful.
I'd say Like Dreamers by Yossi Klein Halevi.
And I will say this, the three of you are extraordinary, and I am so grateful to all of you for jumping on tonight and spending this night helping teenagers and their community to understand better how teenagers can be responsive in this moment, what we could be reading, what they can be doing to advocate for Israel. And I am so grateful for your leadership, all three of you. And you make me feel like our Jewish community and Judaism is in really extraordinary hands. So thank you for being with us tonight. Thank you for all who tuned in. And